They say the most expensive thing a man can ever buy is his freedom. But Harrison Sterling got his for the price of a signature. Or so he thought. He sat in that mahogany boardroom wearing a $5,000 bespoke suit and laughed right in his wife's face as the ink dried on the divorce papers. He called her trash. He told her to go back to wiping tables. He thought the game was over, that he had won. But he forgot one thing. His billionaire father had died 3 days prior, and the old man had been watching everything. The ink on the divorce papers was the trigger, but the reading of the last will and testament, that was the bullet. And Harrison was standing directly in front of the gun. The air inside the conference room on the 42nd floor of the Sterling and Comey building was thin, recycled, and smelled faintly of lemon polish and aggressive cologne. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the grey skyline of Chicago loomed covered in a sheet of freezing rain. But inside, Harrison Sterling was radiating heat, the heat of a man who believes he has just pulled off the heist of the century. Harrison leaned back in his Eames leather chair, spinning a gold-plated Mont Blanc pen between his fingers. He looked at the woman sitting across from him. Maya. Maya Sterling. Soon to be Maya Caldwell again. She looked small in the oversized leather chair. She was wearing a simple grey cardigan over a black dress that had seen better days. Her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were white. She didn't look like the wife of a billionaire shipping magnate. She looked exactly like what Harrison constantly reminded her. She was a waitress who had gotten lucky. Well, Harrison's voice cut through the silence, sharp and impatient. Are we going to stare at the paper all day, Maya? Or are you going to sign it and get the hell out of my building? Arthur Pendergast. The family's longtime attorney sat at the head of the table. He was a man of few words, with skin like parchment paper and eyes that missed nothing. He pushed his glasses up his nose and looked at Maya. Mrs. Sterling, Arthur said softly, I must remind you one final time. By signing this, you are waiving your right to contest the pre-nuptial agreement. You are accepting the lump sum of $50,000, and you are forfeiting any claim to the Sterling real estate, the stock portfolio, and the marital assets. You will leave with essentially nothing but your personal effects. Harrison snorted a cruel, ugly sound. 50 grand is a hell of a lot of tips, Maya. Take it and run. Maya didn't look at Arthur. She looked straight at Harrison. Her eyes, usually warm and brown, were flat and unreadable. For 5 years she had loved this man. For 5 years she had endured his mother's snide comments about her background, his friends' jokes about her education, and eventually his own indifference. I don't want your money, Harrison, Maya said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. Good. Harrison smirked, leaning forward, his predator smile on full display. Because you're not getting it. We both know this was a charity case from the start. I wanted a pretty face to annoy my father and you. Well, you wanted a way out of that diner. We both got what we wanted. Now the ride is over. He checked his Rolex, a Submariner, that cost more than the house Maya grew up in. I have a lunch reservation at the Ridley in 20 minutes. Vanessa is waiting. Just sign the damn paper. Vanessa. The name hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Vanessa Kincaid was a socialite, the daughter of a senator, and the woman Harrison had been sleeping with for the last 6 months. He hadn't even tried to hide it. He wanted a wife who fit his brand, and Maya, with her calloused hands and public school education, was an embarrassment to him, now that he was set to take over the entire company. Maya picked up the pen. It felt heavy like lead. "Are you sure about this, Harrison?" she asked. It wasn't a plea. It sounded almost like a warning, though Harrison was too arrogant to hear it. "Never been more sure of anything in my life," he laughed. "Sign it, darling. Make me a free man." Maya lowered her head. The nib of the pen touched the crisp white legal paper. With a fluid motion, she signed her name, Maya Caldwell Sterling. She set the pen down. "Done," she whispered. Harrison snatched the papers before the ink was even dry. He scanned the signature, his eyes gleaming with triumph. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, looking at her with pure disdain. "Finally," he breathed out, laughing. It was a cold, hollow laugh. "You know I should have done this years ago. You were a bad investment, Maya. No pedigree, no class. Just a drain on my resources." He turned to Arthur Pendergast. "File these immediately. I want the decree absolute by the end of the week." "The papers are signed," Arthur said, his voice devoid of emotion. "You are effectively divorced as of this moment, pending the judge's stamp." "Excellent," Harrison said, checking his reflection in the darkened window. "Now I'm leaving. Tell the old man's estate executors to just email me the details about the inheritance. I don't have time for a long ceremony." "Sit down, Mr. Sterling," Arthur said. The tone was different this time. It wasn't the voice of a family friend. It was the voice of the law. It cracked like a whip. Harrison froze his hand on the door handle. He turned back, frowning. "Excuse me." "I said sit down," Arthur repeated. He didn't look up from his files. He was organizing a new stack of documents, thick-bound in blue velvet folders. "Your father, Preston Sterling, left specific instructions. The reading of the last will and testament was conditioned upon a specific event." "What event?" Harrison snapped, annoyed. "His death. He died 3 days ago. I'm here. Let's get on with it, so I can get my money." "No," Arthur said, finally looking up. His eyes behind the thick lenses were cold steel. "The condition for the reading of the will was not just his death. It was the legal termination of your marriage to Maya." Harrison blinked. He looked at Maya, who was still sitting in her chair, perfectly still. "What?" Harrison laughed, nervous now. "That's ridiculous. Why would he care about my marriage? He hated Maya. He wouldn't even come to the wedding." "Sit down, Harrison," Arthur commanded. "You wanted your divorce. You have it. Now we read the will." Harrison slowly walked back to the table and sat down. The laughter had died in his throat, replaced by a sudden creeping unease. He looked at Maya. She hadn't moved to leave. "You can go, Maya," Harrison hissed. "This doesn't concern you anymore. You signed. You're out." "Actually," Arthur interrupted, opening the blue velvet folder. "She is required to stay." Preston was very specific about that, too. The room went silent. The only sound was the rain lashing against the glass, sounding remarkably like applause. To understand the sheer magnitude of the silence in that room, you have to understand how Harrison and Maya ended up there. 6 years ago, Maya Caldwell was 23 years old, working double shifts at Le Jardin, an upscale French bistro in downtown Chicago. She was invisible. She was the hands that placed the silverware, the voice that recited the specials, the blur of black and white that refilled wine glasses. She was studying nursing at night, exhausted, barely making rent, but she possessed a quiet dignity that most people missed. Harrison Sterling didn't miss it, or rather, he saw it as a challenge. He was 30, the heir to Sterling Logistics, a billion-dollar shipping empire built by his father, Preston Sterling. Harrison was handsome, charming, and ruthless. He came into Le Jardin with a group of investment bankers, loud and demanding. When he snapped his fingers for service, Maya didn't jump. She finished pouring water for an elderly couple at the next table, then calmly walked over to him. "I'll be with you in a moment, sir," she had said. No fear, no fawning. Harrison was intrigued. He wasn't used to waiting. He wasn't used to women who didn't look at him like he was a walking credit card. He pursued her with the same aggression he used in boardrooms. He sent giant bouquets of roses to the restaurant. He waited for her after her shift in his Aston Martin. He swept her off her feet, not because he loved her, but because he wanted to possess her. For Maya, it felt like a fairy tale. She was young, tired of struggling, and here was this Prince Charming offering her the world. She fell in love with the version of himself Harrison presented, the misunderstood son of a tyrant father, a man who just wanted to be loved for himself. They married 6 months later. The wedding was the first crack in the glass. Preston Sterling, the patriarch, refused to attend. He sent a note that simply read, "A wolf does not marry a sheep without intending to eat it." Harrison had ripped the note up, laughing. "He's just a bitter old man," Harrison had told Maya. "He thinks everyone is after his money. He hates that I chose someone real." But Preston was right. As soon as the ring was on her finger, the fairy tale dissolved. Harrison didn't want a partner. He wanted an audience. He wanted Maya to look good on his arm at galas, but he didn't want her to speak. When she tried to talk about her day or her interests, he would check his phone. When she suggested she finish her nursing degree, he laughed. "You're a Sterling now, Maya," he'd said. "Sterlings don't change bedpans, just go shopping. Isn't that what women like you do?" The women like you sting never went away. 3 years into the marriage, Harrison's father, Preston, fell ill. It was a slow, degenerative condition. Harrison visited exactly twice. He spent the visits checking his watch and talking about the inheritance tax. "Just die already, old man," Harrison had grumbled to Maya one night after a visit. "He's holding up the merger." Maya, however, did something Harrison didn't know about. Every Tuesday and Thursday, while Harrison was working late, which usually meant drinks with his mistress of the month, Maya went to the Sterling estate. She didn't go as a daughter-in-law, she went as a nurse. She sat with Preston. She read to him. She adjusted his pillows. She listened to him. At first, Preston was as cold as ice. He called her the gold digger. He refused to look at her. But Maya was patient. She had dealt with rude customers for years. A grumpy billionaire was nothing new. One afternoon, about a year before he died, Preston looked at her while she was reading the financial news to him. "Why are you here, girl?" Preston had rasped. "Harrison isn't here. There's no one to impress. I'm not giving you any extra money." Maya had closed the newspaper. "I'm here because you're lonely, Mr. Sterling, and frankly so am I, and my name is Maya." That was the turning point. Over the next year, a strange, secret friendship formed between the waitress and the Titan. Preston learned that Maya was smart, sharper than Harrison in many ways. She understood people. She understood value, not just price. And she saw Harrison for exactly what he was, a hollow man. Preston also saw the bruises on Maya's spirit. He saw the way she flinched when Harrison raised his voice. He knew about the affairs long before Maya admitted them to herself. Then came Vanessa Kincaid. Vanessa was the final straw. She wasn't just a fling. She was a strategy. Harrison decided he wanted to run for political office eventually, and he needed a power wife. A waitress wouldn't do. He needed blue blood. The day Harrison asked for the divorce, he did it over breakfast. He tossed the papers onto her plate of scrambled eggs. "It's over," he had said, buttering his toast. I've had the lawyers draw this up. It's generous. 50 grand. Sign it and we can avoid a scene. Maya had stared at him. 50,000. After 5 years, Harrison, I signed a prenup, but nothing, he snapped. You brought nothing into this marriage. You leave with nothing. That's how business works. And don't try to fight me, Maya. I have armies of lawyers. You have... What tips? She had packed her bags that day. She moved into a small motel on the outskirts of the city. She cried for 3 days. Then she stopped, because 3 days ago, Preston Sterling had died. And Arthur Pendergast had called her. Don't fight the divorce, Maya Arthur had whispered over the phone. Sign whatever Harrison gives you. Just make sure you are in the room for the reading of the will. Why she had asked. Because Preston plays the long game, Arthur replied. And now, back in the conference room, the long game was about to be revealed. Harrison was tapping his fingers on the mahogany table, looking at Arthur with thinly veiled aggression. Okay, Arthur, Harrison said, gesturing to the blue folder. The waitress stayed. The divorce is signed. Now tell me what I won. Did the old man leave me the Hamptons house, the control of the board? I need to know so I can liquidate some assets for the new venture with Vanessa. Arthur Pendergast adjusted his glasses again. He opened the heavy folder. The paper inside was thick cream-colored and covered in Preston Sterling's sharp, jagged handwriting. I will now read the last will and testament of Preston Xavier Sterling, Arthur announced. First, Arthur read, to my son Harrison, I leave the sum of $1. Harrison froze. He laughed nervously. Okay, very funny. The old man's final joke. Good one. Now get to the real assets. The trust. I am getting to the trust, Arthur said calmly. The Sterling Family Trust, which encompasses 90% of Sterling Logistics, the real estate portfolio, and the liquid capital valued at approximately $4 billion, is governed by a strict morality clause. Harrison rolled his eyes. Yeah, no drugs, no felonies. I'm clean. Hand it over. The clause, Arthur continued, his voice raising slightly to silence. Harrison, specifically states that the beneficiary of the Sterling Trust must be a person of integrity, loyalty, and compassion. My father Preston believed that wealth without character is a recipe for disaster. I have character, Harrison shouted, standing up. I built the Asian distribution network. I increased profits by 20%. You increased profits by cutting health care for the workers, Maya said softly. Harrison whipped around. Shut up. No one asked you. The will continues, Arthur said, his voice hard. My son Harrison has proven time and again that he values money over people. He treated his wife, a woman of patience and kindness, as a disposable object. He neglected his father in his final hours. Therefore, Harrison is disqualified from inheriting the trust. Harrison's face went purple. Disqualified? You can't do that. I'm his only son. I'll sue. I'll burn this firm to the ground. You can try, Arthur said. But the trust is ironclad. However, there is a secondary beneficiary named, someone whom Preston deemed worthy. Someone who sat by his side when his own blood was too busy. Someone who showed him that not everyone in this world is for sale. Arthur looked at Maya. Harrison followed his gaze. He looked at Maya sitting in her cheap cardigan, the ink of her divorce signature still fresh on the table. No, Harrison whispered. No, that's impossible. She's a waitress. Arthur smiled. It was the first time he had smiled all day. Mrs. Sterling, or rather Ms. Caldwell, Arthur said. Preston Sterling has left the entire Sterling estate, including the controlling interest in Sterling Logistics and all private properties to you, on one condition. Harrison felt his knees give out. He slumped back into his chair. "What condition?" Harrison rasped, his voice trembling. "The condition," Arthur read, "is that the transfer of assets only occurs if Maya is no longer legally married to Harrison Sterling. If she had stayed with him, the money would have gone to charity." Preston wanted to ensure that Harrison Sterling would not see a single dime of his fortune. "By forcing the divorce, Harrison, you have literally signed your own inheritance over to your ex-wife." The silence that followed was deafening. Harrison looked at the divorce papers he had just gloated over. He looked at the generous $50,000 settlement. And then he looked at Maya. She wasn't looking at the floor anymore. She was looking at him. And for the first time in years, she didn't look tired. She looked powerful. The silence in the boardroom stretched thick and suffocating. It wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of heavy, pressurized silence that precedes a structural collapse. Harrison Sterling sat frozen. His hand halfway extended toward the divorce papers, as if he could use the force to pull them back to erase the ink that was now sealing his fate. Arthur Pendergast closed the blue velvet folder with a soft final thud. That sound echoed like a gavel striking a block. "This is a joke," Harrison said. His voice was no longer the booming baritone of a CEO. It was thin, reedy cracking at the edges. "Arthur, tell me this is one of the old man's sick tests. He wants to see if I panic fine. I'm not panicking. Just tell me the punchline." Arthur removed his glasses and began to polish them with a silk handkerchief, taking his time. He didn't look at Harrison. He looked through him. "There is no punchline, Harrison. The will is valid. The trust structure is absolute. Preston spent the last 6 months of his life ensuring that there wasn't a single loophole you could crawl through." Harrison stood up so abruptly, his heavy leather chair toppled backward, crashing against the floor-to-ceiling window. He ignored it. He lunged for the divorce decree. "Then I revoke it," he shouted, his eyes wide and frantic. "I haven't left the room. I take it back. We aren't divorced." He grabbed the paper, his fingers tearing the corner in his haste. But before he could rip it in two, a large hand clamped down on his wrist. It wasn't Arthur. It was the security guard who had stepped quietly out of the shadows near the door. A man Harrison had walked past 1,000 times without ever acknowledging. "Release the document, Mr. Sterling." The guard said, his voice low and bored. "Get your hands off me. I own this building," Harrison screamed, spit flying from his lips. "Actually," Arthur said, placing his glasses back on his nose, "Ms. Caldwell owns this building. You are currently trespassing." Harrison froze. He looked at the guard, then at Arthur, and finally he turned his desperate mute eyes toward Maya. Maya hadn't moved. She sat with her hands still folded in her lap, watching the man she had once adored unravel before her eyes. It was pathetic. It was terrifying. And in a deep, dark corner of her heart, it was vindicating. Harrison scrambled around the table, falling to his knees beside her chair. He grabbed her hands, the same hands he had mocked for being rough from work just 10 minutes ago. "Maya, baby, listen to me." He panted, his face slick with sweat. He squeezed her hands so hard it hurt. "You know I didn't mean it. The divorce, it was just business. It was a strategy. We can fix this. We can just tear the papers up, walk out of here, and go renew our vows. Right now. We'll go to Paris. You always wanted to go to Paris, right?" Maya looked down at him. She saw the fear in his eyes. But she realized with a sudden crystal clarity that it wasn't fear of losing her. It was fear of poverty. He looked at her not as a wife, but as a life raft. "Paris?" Maya repeated softly. "Yes, Paris." Harrison nodded frantically, a desperate smile stretching his face. "We'll fly private tonight. Just tell Arthur. Tell him we made a mistake." Maya slowly pulled her hands away from his grip. She stood up. The movement was graceful, unhurried. She smoothed the front of her cheap grey cardigan. "I asked you to take me to Paris for our first anniversary," Maya said, her voice steady and low. "You told me you couldn't be away from the office. You went to Vegas with your friends instead." "I was stupid," Harrison pleaded, reaching for the hem of her dress. "I've changed, Maya. I love you." Maya stepped back out of his reach. "You don't love me, Harrison," she said. Her eyes were dry. The tears she had shed over this man in the last month could have filled an ocean, but that ocean was dry now. "You loved owning me. And now that you don't own me, and you don't own the money, you don't know who you are." She turned to Arthur. "Is it done? Am I free?" Arthur nodded, a rare glimmer of respect in his eyes. "The papers were digitally notarized the moment you both signed. The timestamps are logged on the server. Legally, the marriage is dissolved. The inheritance conditions are met. The assets are yours, Miss Caldwell." Harrison let out a sound that was half sob, half scream. He pounded his fist on the carpet. "You set me up, you witch! You manipulated a senile old man to steal my birthright." "Your father wasn't senile," Maya said, looking down at him one last time. "He was heartbroken. He waited for you, Harrison. Every day. He waited for you to come and just sit with him. Not to talk about stocks, not to ask for a loan. Just to sit. But you never came." She walked toward the door. "I did." "You can't do this to me," Harrison yelled, scrambling to his feet, his face twisting into an ugly mask of rage. "I have a lunch, I have a life, I am Harrison Sterling." "Mr. Sterling," Arthur interrupted, his voice sharp. "I suggest you attend your lunch. You have no business here anymore. Security will escort you to the elevator. Your access badge has already been deactivated." Harrison looked around the room, the seat of power he had coveted his entire life. It felt like the walls were closing in. He looked at Maya, who was walking out the door without looking back. He straightened his jacket. He smoothed his hair. He took a deep breath, trying to summon the arrogance that had shielded him for 35 years. "Fine," Harrison sneered, though his voice shook. "Keep the money. I don't need his charity. I can build my own empire. I have connections. I have Vanessa. You'll see. In a year, I'll buy this company back and fire all of you." He grabbed his briefcase and stormed out, shouldering past the security guard. He needed to get out of that airless room. He needed a drink. He needed to see Vanessa. Vanessa would understand. Her father was a senator. They had power that didn't depend on Preston Sterling's will. He stepped into the elevator, pressing the button for the lobby. As the doors closed, shutting out the sight of Arthur and the boardroom, Harrison laughed. It was a jagged, hysterical sound. "Waitress," he muttered to his reflection in the polished brass doors. "She's just a waitress. She won't last a week." But as the elevator plummeted 42 floors, Harrison Sterling felt a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He checked his phone. No new emails from the bank. No notifications of the transfer. For the first time in his life, his inbox was empty. The rain had turned to sleet by the time Harrison stepped out of the Sterling building. Usually his driver Thomas would be waiting at the curb with the rear door of the Bentley open and a heated umbrella ready. Today the curb was empty. Harrison stood there, the icy slush hitting his expensive Italian loafers, bewildered. He pulled out his phone and dialed Thomas. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service," the automated voice chirped. "What the hell?" Harrison muttered. He checked the app for the company car service. His account was locked. "User suspended authorization revoked." "Arthur," he hissed through gritted teeth. "Petty old bureaucrat." He had to hail a taxi. It took him 10 minutes of standing in the freezing sleet, waving his arm like a common tourist before a yellow cab finally skidded to a halt. Harrison climbed in, soaking wet his $5,000 suit, smelling of damp wool. "The Ridley," Harrison barked at the driver, "and step on it." The drive gave him time to think, or rather to construct a delusion. He would explain it to Vanessa. They would sue. Yes, that was it. They would sue for undue influence. Maya was a nurse. She must have medicated the old man, coerced him. It was a clear case of elder abuse. He would spin the narrative. The media would eat it up. The billionaire son versus the scheming waitress. By the time the taxi pulled up to the Ridley, arguably the most exclusive restaurant in Chicago, Harrison had almost convinced himself that this was just a temporary setback. He walked in, brushing the sleet off his shoulders. The maitre d', a snooty Frenchman named Jean-Luc, looked him up and down with a flicker of distaste, but forced a smile. "Mr. Sterling, you are damp." "Weather," Harrison snapped. "Is Ms. Kincaid here? She is waiting at your usual table. Table 1. Harrison strode through the dining room. Heads turned. Usually they turned with envy. Today he felt like they were turning with curiosity. Did they know no impossible? It had only been an hour. Vanessa was sitting in a booth by the window, looking like a diamond that had been given human form. She was wearing a cream-colored cashmere dress that probably cost more than Maya's entire wardrobe. Her blonde hair was perfect, her posture impeccable. She was sipping a glass of champagne. "You're late," Vanessa said, without looking up from her phone. "And you look terrible. Why are you wet?" Harrison slid into the booth, signaling the waiter for a double scotch. "Rough morning. The lawyers were tedious." Vanessa finally looked at him, her ice-blue eyes sharpening. "But it's done. The waitress is gone." "She signed," Harrison said. He reached for her hand across the table. "I'm a free man, Vanessa. Officially divorced." Vanessa smiled, a slow, predatory curving of her lips. "Good. Daddy was asking about the campaign contributions for his re-election. I told him once the Sterling assets were fully under your control, we'd be writing a very large check." Harrison felt a bead of cold sweat trickle down his back. "Right. The campaign. Listen, Ness, about the assets." "Yes." She paused, her glass halfway to her mouth. "There might be a delay, a slight legal hiccup. The old man's will is a bit complicated. It might take a few weeks to untangle the liquidity." Vanessa frowned. "Weeks Harrison, the gala is in 10 days. We need to announce the donation then. You promised." I know," Harrison snapped louder than he intended. A nearby couple glanced over. He lowered his voice. "I just need to move some things around. But don't worry. I'm still Harrison Sterling. I still run this town." The waiter arrived with his scotch. Harrison downed half of it in one gulp. "You're acting strange," Vanessa noted, eyeing him critically. "You're shaking." "I'm just cold," he lied. "Well, cheer up," she said, tapping her phone screen. "Let's order. I want the lobster thermidor, and another bottle of this Cristal. We should celebrate your freedom." "Of course," Harrison said, forcing a smile. "Order whatever you want." The lunch was a blur. Harrison couldn't taste the food. Every time Vanessa mentioned a vacation, a house she wanted to buy, or her father's political ambitions, he felt the noose tightening. He kept drinking. By the time the bill came, he was on his fourth scotch and feeling a dangerous mix of bravado and nausea. The waiter placed the black leather folder on the table. "I've got it," Harrison said, grandly pulling out his sleek black Centurion card. The card that had no limit. The card that opened every door in the world. He handed it to the waiter without looking at the total. Vanessa was applying lipstick, checking her reflection in a compact. "So when do I move into the penthouse? I assume you're kicking her out immediately." "She's already gone," Harrison mumbled. The waiter returned. He looked uncomfortable. He leaned down, whispering discreetly, "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. The card was declined." Harrison's heart stopped. "Don't be ridiculous. Run it again." "I ran it 3 times, sir. It says, 'Do not honor, account frozen.'" Vanessa stopped applying her lipstick. She snapped the compact shut. The click was loud in the sudden silence of the table. "What do you mean, declined?" she asked, her voice dropping an octave. "It's a mistake," Harrison said, his face flushing crimson. He fumbled in his wallet and pulled out a platinum visa. "Try this one. Bank error. You know how it is." The waiter took the second card and walked away. "Harrison," Vanessa said, her eyes narrowing, "why is your black card frozen?" "I told you it's a glitch, probably triggered by the divorce filing. Security protocols." He laughed nervously. "Technology, right?" The waiter came back faster this time. His face was grave. "Sir, this one is declined too, and the system has an instruction to retain the card." "Retain the card." Harrison stood up. "You can't take my card. Store policy on stolen or frozen assets, sir," the waiter said, stepping back. Vanessa was staring at him. It wasn't concern on her face. It was calculation. She was doing the math, and the numbers weren't adding up. Suddenly, a murmur went through the restaurant. Several people were looking at their phones. A man at the next table whispered to his wife, pointing openly at Harrison. "What is going on?" Harrison demanded. Vanessa picked up her phone. Her face went pale, then hard as stone. "Harrison," she said, her voice like liquid nitrogen. "Look at the news." "I don't care about the news." "Look at it," she hissed, shoving her phone in his face. On the screen was a breaking news alert from the Chicago Financial Times. Headline: "Waitress inherits billions." Preston Sterling's shocking last will revealed. Subtitle shipping: "Magnate disinherits son Harrison Sterling in favor of ex-wife Maya Caldwell." Son left with $1. Harrison stared at the screen. The words swam before his eyes. It was out. It was public. Arthur hadn't wasted a second. The press release must have gone out the moment he left the building. $1, Vanessa read aloud. The disgust in her voice was visceral. "You have $1. Vanessa, listen. It's a mistake. I'm going to sue." "You're going to sue with what money?" She cut him off. She stood up, grabbing her Hermes bag. "Where are you going?" Harrison stammered. "You can't leave me. We're partners." "Partners?" Vanessa laughed. It was a cruel, harsh sound that echoed the way Harrison had laughed at Maya earlier that day. "Harrison, I'm the daughter of a senator. I have an image to maintain. I can't be seen with a pauper, a disinherited failure." "I love you," Harrison shouted, not caring who heard. "You love my status," Vanessa corrected cold-heartedly. "And I loved your checkbook. It seems we are both out of luck." She turned to the waiter. "I'll pay for my half of the champagne. Mr. Sterling can wash dishes for the rest." Vanessa. She didn't look back. She walked out of the restaurant, her heels clicking rhythmically on the floor, leaving Harrison standing alone at table 1. The entire restaurant was watching him. The whispers were growing louder. Disinherited. Broke. $1. The waiter cleared his throat. "Sir, the bill is $1,200. How do you intend to settle it?" Harrison looked at the bill. He looked at his empty wallet. He looked at the window where the sleet was still falling. He had no car. He had no coat. He had left it in the taxi. He had no cards. And he had no one to call. For the first time in his life, Harrison Sterling was truly, utterly alone. And the realization hit him like a physical blow. Maya hadn't just taken the money. She had taken his shield. The morning of the emergency board meeting, the sky over Chicago was a bruise-colored gray. Inside the master suite of the Sterling estate, Maya stood before a floor-to-ceiling mirror. She wasn't looking at the silk drapes or the hand-carved furniture. She was looking at the woman who was about to walk into a den of wolves. She smoothed the lapels of her suit. It wasn't a designer piece. It was a charcoal grey blazer she had bought at a department store clearance sale 2 years ago. The interview suit she had never been allowed to wear because Harrison preferred her to be decorative, not employed. Today she wore it like armor. There was a knock at the door. Arthur Pendergast entered, looking grim. "The car is waiting, Miss Caldwell," he said. "But I must warn you, the board has convened early. Silas Mercer is leading them. He views Preston's death not as a loss, but as a vacancy. He intends to bully you into selling your majority shares by noon." Maya picked up a heavy, cracked leather notebook from the dresser. It still smelled faintly of Preston's pipe tobacco. "Silas thinks he's dealing with a waitress, Arthur," Maya said calmly, tucking the notebook under her arm. "He forgets that waitresses deal with difficult customers every single day. We know how to handle entitlement." The boardroom at Sterling Logistics was designed to intimidate. It was a cavernous space of mahogany and glass located on the 45th floor. When Maya walked in, flanked by Arthur, the air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. 12 men sat around the massive oval table. They were the titans of industry men, with silver hair, expensive watches, and eyes that held no warmth. Not a single one of them stood up to greet her. At the head of the table, Preston's seat, sat Silas Mercer. He was a massive man, with a red, florid face and a white beard. He looked like a Santa Claus who had foreclosed on the North Pole. "Miss Caldwell!" Silas boomed his voice, echoing off the glass walls. He didn't smile. "We were just discussing how to handle this unfortunate transition." Maya walked toward the head of the table. Silas didn't move. "You're in my seat, Mr. Mercer," Maya said softly. Silas chuckled, glancing around at the other directors. A ripple of amusement went through the room. "This seat is for the chairman, young lady. That is a position voted on by the board. You may be the majority shareholder, but you are a guest here." He gestured a meaty hand toward the corner of the room. There, set up specifically to humiliate her, was a cheap folding metal chair. It was placed next to the service station. "We set that up for you," Silas sneered. "It's near the coffee pot. We figured you'd be more comfortable there. Perhaps you could pour us around while the adults talk business." The insult hung in the air, thick and ugly. The men smirked. They expected her to cry or to yell or to run. Maya didn't do any of those things. She walked past the folding chair without even glancing at it. She approached the main table stood directly to Silas's right and placed the leather notebook down with a heavy thud. "I own 51% of this company," Maya said, her voice steady and clear. "Which means I own this table, I own that coffee pot, and I own the building you are currently trespassing in." She opened the notebook. "Preston told me you would try this, Silas," she said. "He told me you were a bully, but he also told me you were careless." Maya flipped to a page marked with a red tab. "Arthur, the file, please." Arthur slid a blue folder across the table. Maya opened it, revealing a spreadsheet highlighted in yellow. According to Preston's private audit, Maya read the construction contracts for the new Singapore distribution hub were awarded to a firm called Mercer Holdings. The project is 40% over budget. Interestingly, Mercer Holdings is registered in the Cayman Islands under your wife's maiden name. The smirk vanished from Silas's face. The room went deathly silent. That is a coincidence," Silas stammered, sweat instantly beading on his forehead. "Is it?" Maya turned her gaze to the man on Silas's left. "And Mr. Henderson, the fleet maintenance contracts. You renewed them last year with a vendor charging double the market rate. A vendor owned by your son-in-law." She looked around the table, making eye contact with every single man. Preston was sick, gentlemen. He wasn't blind. He spent his final months sitting with me, telling me exactly where the bodies were buried. He didn't just leave me the money. He left me the map. Maya leaned forward, resting her hands on the mahogany. "I'm not here to serve you coffee. I am here to clean house. You have two choices. Option A. You resign from the board, immediately keep your pensions, and walk away. Option B, I hand this notebook to the SEC and the IRS, and you spend your retirement in federal prison." She checked her watch, a simple plastic thing she used for nursing shifts. "You have 60 seconds to decide." Silas Mercer looked at the notebook. He looked at Arthur, who was nodding grimly. Then he looked at Maya. He saw no fear in her eyes, only the iron will of a woman who had survived Harrison Sterling for 5 years. Slowly, painfully, Silas pushed his chair back. The legs scraped loudly against the floor. He stood up, gathered his papers with trembling hands, and walked out without a word. One by one, the other wolves followed. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the desperate instinct for self-preservation. When the door clicked shut behind the last of them, Maya let out a long breath. She walked to the head of the table and sat down in the heavy leather chair. It was still warm from Silas, but it belonged to her now. Arthur smiled, a rare expression for him. Preston would have enjoyed that. "He knew, Arthur," Maya whispered, running her hand over the leather armrest. "He knew they would try to crush me. He gave me the gun." "He gave you the tool," Arthur corrected gently. "You were the one brave enough to pull the trigger." Maya looked out the window at the sprawling city below. She was the CEO of a multi-billion-dollar empire. But her thoughts drifted to the man who wasn't there. "Has he called?" she asked. "Harrison." Arthur's face hardened. "He has tried. He's in a difficult position." Maya's expression didn't soften. "He made his position, Arthur. Let him sit in it." The sleet in Chicago doesn't just make you wet. It bites. It stings the skin like thousands of tiny freezing needles. When Harrison Sterling stepped out of the Ridley stripped of his coat left in a taxi he couldn't pay for, and his Rolex held hostage by the restaurant manager, he felt that bite for the first time. He stood on the curb, shivering violently in his $5,000 bespoke suit. The fabric designed for climate-controlled boardrooms and private jets was useless against the wind tunnel of the city streets. He reached for his phone to call his driver, Thomas, before remembering that Thomas answered to the company, and the company now belonged to Maya. "Taxi!" Harrison yelled, waving an arm. A yellow cab pulled over. Harrison grabbed the handle, but the driver looked him up and down. The soaking, wet hair, the wild look in his eyes, the lack of a coat in freezing weather. "Cash up front," the driver said through the cracked window. I don't have cash." Harrison stammered, his teeth chattering. "Take me to the Sterling Tower on the Gold Coast. The concierge will handle it. I'm Harrison Sterling." The driver scoffed. "And I'm the King of England. Walk, pal." The tires screeched as the cab merged back into traffic, splashing slush onto Harrison's Italian loafers. He had to walk. 3 miles. By the time Harrison pushed through the revolving brass doors of his luxury condominium building, he couldn't feel his toes. The lobby was warm, smelling of lilies and expensive floor wax. He exhaled a ragged breath, rushing toward the elevators. "Mr. Sterling." The voice was cool and detached. It belonged to Jerry, the concierge, who had worked there for 6 years. Harrison had never learned Jerry's last name. "Jerry, thank God," Harrison gasped, leaning on the marble desk. "I lost my key. Buzz me up to the penthouse." Jerry didn't move. He stood behind the desk with his hands clasped, a look of polite discomfort on his face. "I'm afraid I can't do that, sir." "What do you mean?" Harrison snapped, a flash of his old arrogance, cutting through the cold. "It's my apartment. Let me in." "It was your apartment," Jerry corrected softly. "We received a legal notice via courier 40 minutes ago from the Sterling Trust. The lease on the penthouse, which is held by the corporation, has been terminated effective immediately due to a violation of the residency morality clause. And..." Jerry paused, glancing at his computer screen. "The Homeowners Association has also placed a lien on your access due to 6 months of unpaid fees." "Unpaid fees?" Harrison shouted. "I told you to bill the office. The office rejected the charges, Mr. Sterling. They marked them as unauthorized personal expenses." Harrison stared at him. The lobby, usually his sanctuary, suddenly felt like a fortress he was locked out of. He saw neighbors walking their dogs, people he had entertained at cocktail parties. They looked at the wet, shivering man in the lobby and quickly looked away, walking faster. "Jerry," Harrison whispered, his voice cracking. "Please, my clothes are up there. My wallet. Just let me in for tonight." Jerry looked at Harrison. He remembered the times Harrison had walked past him without a hello, the times he had snapped his fingers for a package. "I'm sorry, sir," Jerry said, his eyes hard. "Security guidelines are strict. You have to leave." Harrison was escorted out by a guard he didn't recognize. The heavy glass doors shut behind him, sealing him out of his former life. He sat on a freezing concrete bench near a bus stop, his hands shaking as he pulled out his phone. 8% battery. He dialed Vanessa. Blocked. He dialed Jason, his college roommate. Voicemail. He dialed Brad, his investment broker. "Look, Harrison," Brad answered on the second ring, his voice hushed. "I can't talk to you. Compliance is watching everything. If I'm seen aiding a compromised asset, I lose my license. Don't call again." The line went dead. Harrison stared at the black screen. A compromised asset. That's what he was now. Not a friend, not a husband, not a son. An asset that had lost its value. Hunger twisted in his stomach, a sharp, physical pain he hadn't felt in decades. He needed food. He needed a bed. He dug into his pocket and pulled out the only thing he had, the single crumpled $1 bill Arthur Pendergast had handed him. "To my son Harrison. $1. He looked up. Across the street, a neon sign flickered in the twilight, pawn and loan. He touched his cuffs. The diamond-encrusted cufflinks he had put on that morning to celebrate his freedom. He stumbled across the street. The pawnshop was small and smelled of dust. The broker, a man with thick glasses, looked at the cufflinks under a loupe. "White gold, custom setting," Harrison said, his voice trembling. "I paid $8,000 for them." "I'll give you 200, the man said, dropping them onto the glass counter. 200, that's robbery. It's the melt value of the gold, buddy. The diamonds are chips. They're worthless to me. Take it or get out." Harrison looked at the cufflinks symbols of a status that no longer existed. Then he looked at the door where the wind was howling. "Give me the money," he whispered. 10 minutes later, Harrison checked into the Starlight Motel on the edge of the industrial district. The room cost $59 cash. It smelled of stale cigarettes and bleach. The carpet was sticky. He sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, still in his damp suit. He held a lukewarm burger he had bought from a drive-through next door. He took a bite, but he couldn't swallow. The silence in the room was deafening. There were no servants, no yes-men, no music. Just the sound of his own breathing and the distant sirens of a city that continued without him. Harrison Sterling curled up on the dirty bedspread, clutching his knees to his chest to stop the shaking. He thought of Maya. He thought of how she must have felt when he threw those divorce papers at her over breakfast. He finally understood that the cold wasn't just outside. It was inside him. For the first time since he was a child, Harrison buried his face in a pillow and wept. His sobs swallowed by the thin walls of a cheap motel, completely and utterly alone. 2 months later, the snow had turned to grey slush on the streets of Chicago. Outside the towering glass facade of Sterling Logistics, a man stood shivering near the employee entrance. He wore a heavy thrift store coat that was 2 sizes too big, and boots that were cracked at the seams. His beard was unkempt, his eyes hollowed out by sleepless nights and the relentless grind of poverty. It was Harrison. He wasn't there to fight. He wasn't there to sue. The fight had left him weeks ago, somewhere between selling his phone for rent money and being fired from a construction site for not having the stamina to lift drywall. He was there because he had nowhere else to go. At 6:00 p.m., the automatic doors slid open. Maya walked out. She looked different, not just because of the tailored coat or the security detail trailing a few steps behind her. She walked with a different center of gravity. She wasn't the waitress trying to be invisible. She was the CEO who had just successfully navigated a hostile takeover and saved 3,000 jobs. Harrison stepped forward. The security guard tensed, reaching for his belt, but Maya saw him. She raised a hand to stop the guard. "It's okay," she said. She stopped a few feet away from him. She didn't look angry. She didn't look triumphant. She just looked steady. "Harrison," she said quietly. "Maya," he croaked. His voice was rough. I saw the quarterly earnings report in the discarded paper. You're up 12%. "I am," she nodded. "I tried to get a meeting," he stammered, wringing his hands. "Your secretary blocked me. Maya, I'm living in a shelter on 5th. I have nothing. No one will hire me. The name Sterling is poison in this town now." He looked up at her, tears welling in his eyes. "I know I was a monster. I know I deserve this. But please, just give me something. A loan, a ticket out of here, anything." Maya looked at the man who had laughed while signing their divorce papers. She remembered the humiliation, the cruelty. But she also remembered Preston's will, integrity, compassion. If she left him to rot, she would be no better than he was. But if she gave him money, he would never learn. She reached into her bag. Harrison's eyes lit up, expecting a checkbook. Instead, she pulled out a business card. It wasn't for Sterling Logistics. It was for Le Jardin, the bistro, where they had met. "I bought the restaurant last week," Maya said. "The manager tells me they are short-staffed." Harrison stared at the card. "You want me to eat there?" "I want you to work there," Maya corrected. "They need a dishwasher. Minimum wage. Tips are pooled. It's honest work, Harrison. It's the work you laughed at." Harrison's face crumbled. "A dishwasher, I was a CEO." "You were a CEO by birth," Maya said firmly. "You can be a man by choice. If you want to eat, if you want a warm place to be, show up at 7:00 a.m. tomorrow. Ask for Henri. He knows who you are, and he promised not to go easy on you." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Your father didn't hate you, Harrison. He wanted you to build something. So go build yourself. From the ground up." She turned and walked toward her waiting car. Harrison stood alone on the sidewalk, the freezing wind biting his face. He looked at the sleek black car driving away, carrying the woman he had thrown away. Then he looked down at the small white card in his dirty hand. Le Jardin, staff entrance in the alley. For a long moment he wanted to tear it up. He wanted to scream, but his stomach growled a fierce, undeniable reminder of his reality. Harrison Sterling wiped his eyes with his sleeve. He put the card in his pocket, buttoned his oversized coat, and began the long walk toward the restaurant. He had a shift to catch in the morning. Harrison Sterling thought the signature on that divorce paper was the end of his troubles, but it was actually the beginning of his education. In the end, he didn't lose his fortune because of a lawyer or a loophole. He lost it because of his character. He learned too late that the person serving the table is just as valuable as the person sitting at it, and sometimes they are much, much stronger. Preston Sterling's final act wasn't just about giving billions to Maya. It was about giving his son the one thing money couldn't buy, a chance to become human again. Harrison is currently scrubbing plates at Le Jardin. He's tired, his hands are blistered, and he's broke. But for the first time in his life, he's earning his keep. And Maya, she's proving that kindness isn't a weakness, it's the ultimate power move. Wow, what a journey. From the penthouse to the dish pit. I want to know what you think. Did Harrison deserve that ending? Or was Maya too harsh? Would you have given him the money, or was the job offer the perfect justice? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of karma and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel, and subscribe so you don't miss our next story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.